This video is going to be a response to the video made by Adam something called Why We Shouldn't Build Skyscrapers. Now, the reason I'm making a response to this video is due to the fact that upon watching it, I thought that while it made some interesting points, it also had some problems with the overall message it was trying to portray, and so I wanted to talk about those problems. Now, before I go any further into this video, I want to make a disclaimer first. I hold no ill will towards Adam something. While I disagree on his points surrounding skyscrapers, I think the YouTube channel is quite interesting and makes decent content. So don't think this video is an attack on him or his character. It's just about skyscrapers, that's it. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. The main point that Adam states at the beginning of the video and references back to multiple times throughout the video is that in 99.9% of cases, you don't need to build any higher than 10 floors. And so, as I go through this video, whenever I say a skyscraper or high-rise, I am typically referring to buildings that are just taller than 10 floors high. In order to prove his main statement, Adam makes 4 major points that I'm going to cover and discuss one by one. The first major point Adam makes is the environmental cost of building high. Since according to him, the taller you build, the more difficult it is to cool/heat such a building, and thus buildings that are taller are going to consume more energy and be worse for the environment. In order to back this up, Adam cites a Guardian article that talks about how taller buildings significantly consumed more gas and electricity. Now, I tried to look into this Guardian article, and while Adam didn't have the article linked anywhere in the comments or the description, I was able to find it and read it. And the article is quite short, just remarking that how, according to one study, skyscrapers proportionally consume more electricity and gas. However, the article didn't actually say what study it used to get this information, but luckily, with some quick Googling and digging, I found the study they were referencing. The study was published in the UCL Energy Institute that looked into how much energy different sized buildings consumed during its operation. And while the study was quite interesting with some of the points it makes, we can pretty quickly see that there are some flaws with it. That flaw being the sample size. The study only looked into the energy usage of 610 office buildings in London, which isn't a lot of buildings, and isn't necessarily indicative of the global situation surrounding the differences in energy consumption when it comes to tall buildings. So I feel like relying on this study to say that taller buildings significantly consume more energy might be a bit of a misstep. And to round this general point off, Adam says that you can make green skyscrapers, which kind of makes this entire point not that important, and all the research I put into it, not that important either. Yeah. The second major point that Adam makes surrounding high-rise buildings is cost. According to him, since it costs more to build higher, any high-rise buildings that will be used for residential areas would thus have higher rent costs, which means for it to work as a proper residential area, the government would have to step in to intervene. Now, without going into the deep weeds of house pricing and the housing market, I feel like this point is forgetting an important factor when it comes to pricing in the high-rise buildings. Because while, yes, building taller is generally more expensive than building low-rise buildings, taller buildings can fit more people in a smaller amount of land. And that's what matters here, because in large cities, land is very expensive. So being able to fit more people in a smaller amount of land can actually reduce renting prices in a city. And so I feel like this kind of invalidates this overall cost point he's trying to make here. The third major point that Adam makes is that high-rise buildings encourage alienation. Because since there are no social spaces within high-rise buildings, and that getting to the bottom floor in high-rise buildings takes significantly longer, this means that people who live in high-rise buildings will have less access to social spaces and thus be more alienated. Now, the first point I want to make surrounding this topic is the claim that high-rise buildings don't have social spaces. Well, yes, they do generally have less social spaces inside their building when compared to the ground. Those social spaces do sometimes exist through pools, gyms, and hell, even small commercial establishments. But the more important point I wanted to make was surrounding Adam's claims of travel times between different floors. In the video, Adam claims that going down to the park from the 5th floor and the 50th floor would be quite different, and that going from the 5th floor, it would only take around 5 minutes, and from the 50th floor, it would take 15. Now, the only thing I can imagine that would cause such a difference in travel times between different floors would be the time it takes to get on an elevator and to travel to the bottom floor. And it is with that we see the major issue with this point, because there is almost no reality where it takes one 15 minutes to travel 50 floors. Let me explain. Most medium-sized residential buildings use traction elevators, which on average can travel 2.5 meters per second. Considering that a floor is typically 3 meters tall for a residential building and 3.9 meters tall for office buildings, we can do some simple math to figure out how long it would take to travel 50 floors. And by my calculations, it would take around 60 seconds for a residential building and 78 seconds for an office building to travel 50 floors. Now, obviously, this doesn't factor in the waiting times for an elevator, and that's because it turns out trying to calculate waiting times for elevators is actually extremely complicated, and there's like multiple different papers and contentious debate around. It is so complicated, and it broke my brain. But regardless, I think this shows that the difference in travel times between different floors shouldn't be that large, and certainly wouldn't hamper people enough that they would just stay in their apartments, as Adam claims. The fourth major point that Adam makes surrounds logistics, and how by having lots of people in one area, you need larger facilities and services in that area. And how if you have an area of office buildings, they'll only be used in the day and won't be used during the night. And I agree with every single point he made here. I just can't see why this is a bad thing. The only thing I can see as an issue is needing to build more parking lots, since parking lots take up a lot of land and space, something that you don't have inside of a city. But other than that, what's the issue? People need these services whether they live in high-rise or low-rise. The only difference is scaling, and arguably scaling upwards for some facilities is more efficient than having 5 different facilities serving a group of spread out people. Now, after making these 4 main points, Adam goes on to give an example of why in 99.9% of cases you don't need to build above 10 floors, and he uses the Burj Khalifa as his example. He goes to show how in the plot of land that the Burj Khalifa takes up, it provides less working space and residential space than 5 village houses. But I have a serious issue with this example though. The Burj Khalifa was never made for proper residential use. It was made as a dick measuring contest and for tourism. So obviously it's not going to be efficient at using land space for residential/office areas because it was never made for that in the first place. A better example to highlight the effectiveness of skyscrapers when it comes to using small amounts of land to fit a lot of people would be the Central Plaza building in Hong Kong. The Central Plaza building is 374 meters tall with 78 floors. The building takes up 7,230 square meters of land and provides 172,798 square meters of floor space. The faluhaz, in comparison, would only be able to provide roughly 43,500 square meters of floor space. And that's ignoring the practical fact that you wouldn't be able to fit such a long building on a square plot of land. So the Central Plaza is able to provide close to 4 times more floor space than the faluhaz, the same amount of land. Now, Adam does make some more minor points near the end of the video, but I think I've already covered most of the talking points he made that I wanted to cover. To bring this all back to the initial point that Adam made, that being that in 99.9% of cases, you don't need to build more than 10 floors high, I propose 2 points as to why that isn't true. The first point is how skyscrapers work. They can have more people in a limited amount of land than any low-rise building can, as demonstrated by my earlier example of Central Plaza in Hong Kong. And since land is such a valuable commodity in cities, it makes sense to try to get as much floor space and as little land space as possible. The second point is kind of related to the first, and that's how since more people are closer to each other within a limited amount of land in high-rise buildings, it means that people have to travel shorter distances to get to the places that they need to go to. Since you can fit a lot more supermarkets, schools, and other services in a smaller land area through the use of high-rise buildings. And I think as long as these 2 points hold up, it's worth it to build above 10 floors in more than 0.01% of the cases. So yeah, that's my video. One of the main reasons I wanted to make this video in the first place is just due to my own personal experience. I've lived in Hong Kong and Macau for most of my life, and so I'm very used to living and working inside skyscrapers. And so when I saw this video, it rubbed me the wrong way, because I thought that my experience living in skyscrapers showed that the points of the video weren't very accurate. And I hope that this video that I just made managed to show that. So, does that mean that skyscrapers are amazing and they should always be built? No, of course not. Skyscrapers have their use just like any building, and as useful as skyscrapers can be, they're not always the best choice. After all, there's no point in building a skyscraper in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, that's my video, and I would encourage any of you watching this video to go watch Abner's video as well to make your own conclusion about the entire topic surrounding skyscrapers and high-rise buildings. His video will be in the description if you want to check it out, and so will the study that I cited earlier and any other sources I used to make this video in the first place. Make sure to go check them all out, and I hope that at the very least, this video was an interesting look on skyscrapers, high-rises, and their use in our lives.